This is Film Talk, where we interview the brightest minds in filmmaking 5 days a week. Do you need a great camera for your next shoot? You may want to consider the world's lightest handheld Super 35 digital film camera, Blackmagic's Ursa Mini 4.6K. The Ursa Mini boasts a 4.6K sensor, global shutter, and up to 15 stops of dynamic range. It's perfectly balanced for handheld use and comfortable enough to be used all day long. Scene one, take one. Film Talk Nation, we are greenlit for yet another great show. Vanessa Frank here, and I'm excited to bring you our featured guest today, Christopher Kenworthy. Christopher, are you ready for your close-up?
Yep, absolutely.
Christopher Kenworthy is a screenwriter, director, and producer of countless commercial projects and music videos, numerous short films, and a feature called The Sculpture's Ritual. He is the best-selling author of the renowned film book series Master Shots, which includes volume 1, 2, and 3, Master Shots Story, Master Shots Suspense, and Master Shots Action. He's also the author of 2 well-reviewed novels and numerous critically acclaimed short stories. His latest film books are Shoot Like Tarantino, Shoot Like Spielberg, and Shoot Like Scorsese. Christopher, it's an honor to have you on the show today.
Oh, thanks so much. It's great hearing everything I've done because I'd pretty much forgotten all that.
I think it's always nice to kind of have a retrospective moment. We all need that at some point in our careers. Um, well, Christopher, I am so pumped up and excited to speak to you today as I'm a huge fan of your books. I was just telling a friend of mine earlier that I kind of feel like the value of your combined collection of books is probably equitable to about 4 years in film school. And yeah, I feel that probably anyone who has had a chance to dig into your books would agree with that. I know certainly I've seen rave reviews on Amazon and other such websites of people already saying these books are just a fundamental and critical part of a young filmmaker understanding the semiotics of filmmaking and how they can best use framing to really get across their message. But before we dig into all of this incredible work that you've done for your Master Shot series, I would just love to go back a little bit earlier in this whole story and find out how you yourself first got into the film industry.
It's a long and convoluted story, but I'll cut it down as much as I can. I think my initial interest came because I stumbled across a film set by accident. I'd seen a children's film called Swallows and Amazons back in the mid 70s.
Yes,
Beautiful
classic.
film. I absolutely love that film.
Me too. I grew up on it myself.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's wonderful.
yeah,
It remains a really good film. I
it
still
is.
love it.
I kind of
Um,
heard recently that they were remaking it, which slightly troubled me.
Yeah, it troubled me too. I'm actually in touch with 2 of the actors out of it now, which is
Oh,
lovely. And
really?
yeah, and I think one of them's sort of vaguely involved with it and not exactly giving it the thumbs up, but trying to make sure that it doesn't go completely astray.
Yeah.
But a remake of a classic is a scary
It is
thing.
very scary, especially when it's a children's movie and that's like such a seminal experience for so
Yeah.
many of us. It's anyway, before we got on to that whole subject, you were telling us about your journey into filmmaking.
Well, yeah, and coming across this film set, I was on holiday in the Lake District and I came across this island and went, oh, I know this place, but it looks different. Why does it look different?
Mm,
And so immediately I started to realize that lenses and the way you use a lens on a camera affects the way you see reality. It makes it
yes.
more intense, more dreamlike, more whatever emotion you're trying to get across, the choice of the lens, the way you place the camera, that was immediately apparent to me. And from that moment on, from
And
standing there in the middle of Swallows and Amazons, I went, I want to do this. And
and what, Christopher, what age were you at this point?
I think it was about 9 or 10.
Oh my gosh, because I mean that's a very I can see someone at that age looking at a film set and going, "Oh, this is fun. There's costumes and there's actors." But having that kind of frame of mind to be able to go, "Oh, there's lenses," and you can kind of, you can change the look of something. That's really evolved for a 9-year-old.
Well, I was a little bit lucky because my dad was one of those people who had an 8 millimeter film camera back in those days.
Uh-huh. Okay.
It was just so unusual. These days, everybody shoots on their phone, so you know roughly what a camera does when it moves, even though you
Yes.
can't change the lens on it. But I'd had some experience with that camera, messing around, using up the old film, and it had not been very good. So when I
Mm.
saw a real place, I couldn't help but think, what would happen if I had that camera here and could
Yeah.
film all my friends running around on the island? What would it look like? So,
Yeah. Wow. And so then, having had that very visceral moment as a child, what steps did you then make to consolidate upon that and actually turn it into a reality?
well, I was a very lazy filmmaker for a long time, in that I just messed around with cameras as a hobby. And this
Yeah.
is partly because I came from the north of England, where it was not you were not
I came
told.
from the north of England as well.
Really,
Where did you come from?
I'm from Preston originally.
No way. One of our closest friends is from Preston. I grew up in Sheffield. So there
Oh,
you
I
go.
know
Yeah.
Sheffield.
I am
Yeah.
imagining all these Americans are listening to this right now, having no idea what we're talking about. But
Well, no, but I'm trying to think of somewhere equivalent in America, and I'm not sure I can really.
I
But
mean, I think that's I mean, I think it's interesting from my point of view. It's interesting from a filmmaking point, purely because the north of England, at least if you know a fair few years ago, was a pretty bleak place to live, depending on where you lived, and that it's not exactly the heart of Hollywood by any stretch of the imagination. And I think it's a really interesting thing when you see these actors like Jamie Bell or some great British filmmakers that come from that part of the country where you really just I don't know, it's I think it's one thing when someone has grown up in LA and kind of fallen into the industry because that's what everyone's doing, but when you come from the north of England and have had that vision as a young kid, you've kind of probably had to make your path, to because there's just not much of an industry around, right?
absolutely, and you've also to overcome the psychology of the place.
Yes. Yeah, because it's very industrial. It's very
Absolutely.
industrial. I feel like it's maybe like I mean, I've never been to Baltimore, but from what I've been told it's that kind of like very industrial kind of same kind of feel in the US. But anyway.
Yeah, and the focus is on that. And when you're going to school and seeing careers advisors, even if you say to them, I want to do something more exciting, they'll always say, okay, but just look at these office jobs or
Yeah.
look at
Oh,
this industry.
industrial work. A lot of it's
Yeah,
very industrial. Yeah.
very, very difficult to even begin to speculate that you might do something like be a filmmaker. That's something people in London do or people in Hollywood do. You don't do that in the North.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
so
Oh, I know it.
yeah. So a good 20 years or so passed that way. And in fact, I managed to become a novelist, as you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah.
Even that was a huge leap to go, well, okay, I can go and have this crazy job where I make up stories and people will pay
Mm.
me for it. So I carved out that career, but the whole time I was a little frustrated by writing and constantly imagining the novels as films and that sort of thing. I think every novelist goes through that. Oh, wouldn't it be great if my
Yes.
novel was a film? So I resisted for a long time, thinking I'm just going through that phase that all novelists go through. But then eventually it got too much. I just couldn't bear it. I loved film so
Mm.
much at that point.
Yeah.
I just had to do it. So I think I was watching Onegin by, oh, I can't remember the director's name now. I use her in all the books, but my mind's gone blank on the director. Ray Fiennes' his sister. What's her name? Anyway, Fiennes is her surname.
Okay.
And she did this film that was just so, nobody ever saw this film, but it was just so perfect. And I went, okay, I've got to be that good. I want to be that good at something.
Mm.
So I made the commitment, and it's that decision is the most important thing. It's not ever being given money, ever being approved of, ever going to a film school. It's when you say, I'm going to do
Yeah.
this. That's what gets you into the industry.
I completely agree. So, was that transition from being a novelist, and indeed a novelist who's critically acclaimed, to being a filmmaker and working within what is quite a different format? In fact, I'm working with a young writer right now who comes from a similar background, and and we're continually having these conversations about how there's certain things that just work so well in a novel because it's an internal conversation that the character's having, to all of a sudden that question of how do you transition that story to being something that's action rather than just talking or thinking. And I think for novelists that that can be a real stretch. How did you make that leap?
By making a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
The first short film I made was not that short. It was 45 minutes long, and it was based on one of my novels.
Mm.
Now, a lot of people said to me, "That's such a mistake. You should get somebody else's script." But the truth is that wrecking my own novel so horrendously was a awful thing to do. I learned so much about, well, for a start, what was working as story in the novel and what wasn't.
Mm.
Because if it works okay in a novel, it doesn't necessarily translate to film. And the
Oh
moment
no.
we
Yeah.
scenes, you go, oh my goodness, they're just think pieces that someone just having a conversation, having a thought. So by the end of shooting, what did we shoot for? 10 days, 45-minute film, and I felt like I'd been through film school, utterly
Yes.
humiliated, and really had a much better idea of what worked and what didn't.
Yeah.
I started to respect story way more than I ever had as a novelist because, ironically, you can get away with having very thin storylines, plotless novels,
Mm.
and people will love that. It's okay, but not in film.
Yeah. I it's interesting this whole thing of that journey of figuring out that what works so beautifully in a novel can really not work on screen. Last year was working on a script of a novel that I had loved for like 20 years and just felt like, wow, this would make such a beautiful movie. And so I poured months and months and months of blood, sweat, and tears into it. And I took it to Linda Sager, who's an incredible screenplay analyst. In fact, she pretty much invented the script analysis industry in the early 80s. And she just read the script and she was like, it's well written, but you need to realize that this entire premise does not work as a movie. And so I had that kind of like big meltdown moment where it's like, what have I been, spending the last few months on? And amazingly, she's such a great script analyst. She just did an incredible job of helping me brainstorm how we could change it which thankfully being that it's kind of in the public domain, there was the freedom to do. But boy, you're absolutely right. There is nothing that is going to put you on a swifter learning curve than working on a passion project and suddenly realizing what worked so well in that novel is just it's impossible to transfer to the screen.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it's okay to have a passion project for that reason. You've got to get it out of your system in the same way that novelists write an autobiographical novel and throw it away, never let anyone see it.
Mm.
It's not a bad way to start because at least you've got the energy to
Yes,
get.
no, absolutely. Did you ever get to see the movie Perfume?
I didn't know.
Yeah, so it's this movie that was adapted by this beautiful novel by Patrick Suskind that originally was published in German and then translated into various languages. And the entire novel is about the sense of smell and this protagonist who has an incredible, like supernatural gift of smell, and yet he has no odor of his own. And so people inherently don't trust him. And it's just this very interesting kind of story about this psychopathic character. Anyway, it's when you read it, it's like sheer poetry. And
Mhm.
then when I heard it was going to be adapted into a movie, I was like, how is that even viable? I mean, and yet it's a pretty interesting case study because, boy, that director, I have to hand it to him. I think he did an amazing job of adapting a novel that by anyone's reckoning would have been impossible to adapt. And yet he figured out how to demonstrate smell in film. So yeah,
Sure.
rather him than me. Well, Christopher, as I mentioned earlier, I adore your books. I just really feel that to have these books that effectively for those in our audience that have not yet had the opportunity to see this master shot series, and everybody just needs to, there'll be a link in the show notes. People need to go check out these books because they are amazing. What these books do is that they really break down just shot by shot all of these shots that, we've maybe seen in a movie and gone, oh, that looks so cool. I wonder why this works. I wonder why it doesn't work. You are like the man behind the curtain revealing this to us, all of this information to us in a way that's just really easy to understand and very observational, very scientific. And I feel like what it really does is it helps readers to kind of understand that filmmaking is a language, and like any language, there's a grammar, there's vocabulary you have to learn, in order to make sentences that are going to make sense to the reader. And I really feel that these books are an incredible tool. And I was really excited today. I finally got to have this interactive experience with this new series that you have, which is the kind of your interactive book. So I was looking at Master Shot Story, which am I right in thinking it pulls shots from all three of your previous kind of 2D printed book versions, right?
Yes, that's right.
And so, yeah, effectively what this book does, which I was really clueless. I was sent, I was very kindly sent a copy of this by your publisher, and I really didn't know what to expect because, candidly, I've just never had the experience of an interactive book. And for me, it was like this paradigm shift of realizing, like, wow, this is the future of filmmaking books for directors, because every one of these shots, you're not just explaining it on in writing. There is an interactive example, and furthermore, then there's an interactive example with a voiceover that explains it bit by bit. It's mind blowing to me. It's absolutely mind blowing. So I would love you to tell us a little bit of like how you came up with the idea of creating this Master Shots series.
It came about partly through frustration with other books. There are so many good books out there, and I read all of them, I think, pretty much all of them. And I love them. A lot of them were great. They gave me a lot, but they didn't ever go beyond sort of showing you how to collect footage. They seem to be about, get through your day and get a master shot, get this angle, get
Yeah.
that angle. And it just felt a little dry and empty. I'd watch films and I'd go, why did I feel something at that moment? Was it
Yes.
just music? Was it the actor? But no, the camera's doing something to make you feel, to make you think, to guide your emotions and your thoughts through the film. It's not arbitrary, it's not documentary making.
Mm.
So out of the frustration of wanting to know how does this work? I don't know how it works, so I'll try and work it out. And as I took films and broke them down, got the shots that I liked and saw how they worked, the book just naturally came out of that. It was really obvious that this was something that could be shared with other people, and that went on. The second Master Shots book was then about dialogue, because I'm endlessly frustrated with how badly dialogue is shot. You stand
Mm.
one person there, two cameras.
Yes.
There's your scene. It drives me crazy. But people are getting better
Yes.
now. And then there was a third book, the director's vision, that's Master Shots 3, to try and go a little more advanced and show how you can really use this technology, the lens really, and the camera motion to mine all the emotion and meaning in a scene.
And then you went on to create this great series, Shoot Like Tarantino, Shoot Like Spielberg, Shoot Like Scorsese, which I feel like that particularly for a lot of younger filmmakers that maybe are still struggling to find their own voice. It seems to me, and I know that this is maybe a controversial point of view, but I think that oftentimes what happens is the first step of learning to be a director is learning to imitate someone else. And
Mm-hmm.
then once you've kind of emulated that and just figured out the basics of how can I put a good scene together, even if that means that you're really kind of copying a Tarantino or a Scorsese, then you're able to, with that filmmaking vernacular, to move on and develop your own style. And I definitely feel that for that interim stage, this book series is probably of great use to both to younger filmmakers who just want to be able to emulate someone's style, but furthermore to fans of those styles that really want to have it explained to them. So I'm fascinated by this process that you've gone through of breaking down these movies and analyzing them, because I feel that particularly for film directors and to a certain extent for writers as well, if we're good at what we do, we spend a lot of time watching and rewatching movies of all eras, analyzing them, meditating on them, reading the critical reviews, and doing the best possible job we can of breaking them down. But I think for most of them, that's a process that we've never necessarily been taught. I think it's something that one more so has to kind of just try and figure out one's own method for, which is oftentimes a lot less systematic than would be ideal. And so being that you're someone who is such an expert in this area, who's done it time and time again, to critical renown, I just love if you could explain to those of us who need to do that for our jobs as filmmakers or writers, kind of step by step, what process you go through to break down the components of a movie, analyze them, and categorize them.
Yeah, the first stage is just absorbing the films as they're meant to be seen without any analysis at all,
Mm-hmm.
because a good film will draw you in anyway. So if you're trying to watch it for shots, if it's good, you won't see the shots because you'll start following the story.
Yeah.
So after I've done that, I just absorb all the films and almost get sick of them. So for Tarantino, that book, for instance, I watched every Tarantino film, and I was not a fan beforehand.
Yeah.
Um, and by the end, I started to see some absolute brilliance in there. Even if you don't like the films, there
Yes,
was something
absolutely.
very, very clever going on. People say, "Oh, he's derivative. He takes this from there."
But he's
Whatever.
brilliant, and he's brilliant in the way he's derivative. Like it takes the mind of a genius to be able to draw from that many sources.
But it's like John Williams with his music. Classical musicians will always say, "Oh, he's taking this from there and this from there," but he does it better than anybody else. So,
Exactly.
I'm happy with that. So after I've watched the films in that way, I then watch them again, but with the sound off, no volume, and that's when
Really?
yeah, yeah, and that's the only way to, well, you watch the film and you experience it again, and you feel everything again, even though you can't hear what's being said, and that's when you go, so the camera moving there is
That is
doing.
so smart. You know what? I maybe everyone knew to do that. I did not know to do that. So I'm like, wow, that's just taught me a big lesson.
It's something I really try and push. Any time that you love a scene, watch it without sound. Does it work as a silent movie? If it doesn't, then it might be just that it's your favorite because it's your favorite. Whereas if it works without sound, it's probably going to be fairly universal.
Yeah. Okay. So then having done that, so you've watched it, you've just had that initial immersive experience and then you've watched it a second time without sound to be able to be kind of a step back. I feel like it's almost like this kind of like Brechtian technique, of like just putting some distance between you and the content. What do you then do? Do you have a third step?
Yeah, I pick up a camera, and if there's anyone in the house, I will film them and move the camera in the same way to try and
Mm,
emulate what I've done. So if there's no one in the house, I'll stick a chair there and try and guess the lens. You get very good at spotting
I would
lenses.
imagine so.
Yeah, and so you use a different lens, shorter lens, wider lens,
Mm.
move the camera faster, slower around, and you just try and emulate the shot until you get it, and that process it breaks the process down for you.
Wow. And then is there any step that you take after that to do you kind of like group up all the similar shots or kind of categorize things or archive your thoughts on this? I mean, what do you then do?
That just kind of leaps out at you. Partly, I mean, especially with the shoot like books, you start to see patterns. I thought that it would be overwhelming in a way to find all the techniques that these
Yeah, I
directors,
would imagine so.
especially Scorsese. I thought he's got so many different styles. He does so much. How am I ever going to do this? But what astonished me when I watched all the films at once was that most of the time, and I mentioned this in the book, he's actually quite conventional. He just documents what's there. He shoots it
Mm.
really, really straightforwardly. But at the points where it really counts, the really key moments in the film, then he pulls out all the stops and is an absolute genius. So it's like he's saving his energy for these great
That's
moments.
really interesting. That's really interesting. I'm a huge fan of I've been chatting with someone recently about just this whole thing of that with action sequences and dance sequences, when you look at movies from like the 50s and 60s and 70s, it tended to be wider shots, so you really saw the artistry of the movement. And now it's like you watch like Step Up 4, 5, or whatever we're at with that, and it's like you feel like you're having an epileptic shock by the end of it, because it's like cutting every, like fraction of a second. And personally, I just feel like you lose compared to like a Jackie Chan movie or something like that. You just lose so much of the artistry. It's almost because in your mind you're thinking, well, how difficult was it to do that movement for like, point 0.3 seconds. So it's kind of that's kind of interesting to hear that even coming from a master like that, that he would maybe, he really is picking his moments to do something that feels more involved, and the rest of the time he's kind of hanging back a little bit. I think that's very interesting.
He may disagree with me and say that he's brilliant all the time, but
Yeah.
I'm really interested to ask if it's a conscious thing because I don't know if he's consciously waiting for those moments, but
Yeah.
certainly seems like it. And there are 10 main techniques pretty much that he uses in every film, whatever the style. And that's pretty stunning.
you,
And
you
it
know
shows.
my guess would be that I'm guessing he probably just has that genius instinct. It's like he just knows. I think that comes from when people have watched, like yourself, have just watched. I mean, like Tarantino, my gosh, like he's got an entire video rental store in his home, and he continues to watch every single day hours and hours of movies. And I think that then builds up that subconscious reflex where a good director knows what moment counts and what moment doesn't. um
Yeah,
yeah.
it's true. The more you watch, as long as you're watching consciously and looking for this stuff, it becomes well, you almost you know what the next cut will be, you know what the next angle will be, and if it's something different, you go, "Oh, why did that happen?" So,
Yeah.
which is always nice.
Yeah. Well, so Christopher, I love to ask my guests about like shortcuts and hacks, just because the reality is that the industry has been around now for over 100 years, and that when there's several generations of people who've kind of trampled the ground before you, one would hope that they've picked up a few techniques that they can pass down that hopefully are going to make things that much easier for the people who come after them. So I'm wondering, being that you're someone who has this incredible gift of analysis and teaching young and not so young filmmakers about how they can learn from these masters, and how they can glean from these shots to just build up a really amazing sequence. What, other than saying to filmmakers, hey, you just need to watch as many movies as possible and analyze them, what kind of shortcuts and hacks have you found to be kind of the baseline of what's going to really help a director, just from all of this work that you've done? Are there maybe two or three things that you really feel can make a big difference in a director's work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most important things that I managed to do at one point, before you roll camera, you check, is this as good as it can be? And it sounds obvious, and every director should always be going, "Oh, is this really good?" But you don't. You start to get into this pattern where you are just trying to collect the footage before the
Yeah.
money rings at the time, and there's a producer looking over your shoulder.
Yeah.
So you have to say, I'm not going to compromise. Obviously, you can't be a prima donna and say, "Oh, we're going to set up this shot for the next 10 hours," or you
Yeah.
go home without having shot anything. But when you've lined up, you look at it and you go, is this really telling the story for this moment? Is it
Mm.
selling the shot? Is it making the most of the actor? Or have I just compromised again? And I think if you ask yourself that question, you sometimes go, let's just tweak it a little. Let's make that lens a little shorter. Let's move the actor a little faster. Let's do something a bit more intense to bring out the intensity of the scene.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites. Another one, and this is definitely a hack rather than a technique. If nothing's working, if it just looks bad and you can't get anything to be the way you want it to be, simply put the camera high up or low down.
Huh.
Because
Yeah.
and you keep everything else the same, the blocking, everything else, and it doesn't always work. But I'd say 80% of the time that can rescue a boring shot.
Because it just
Because
makes it more stylized.
yeah, and the camera moves differently when it's low down, following someone. And that is an emergency technique. I wouldn't use that all the time because it's going to really change the feel of
Yeah,
the
it's
shot.
got some very strong connotations.
Yes, it does. So you don't have to go 6 feet high. Sometimes just slightly above the eye line, and it just changes the atmosphere a little.
Mm.
So it can be done subtly and occasionally. But if you're just desperate and you've got to shoot, and the shot looks boring, move the camera up a
And
foot.
why not? I mean, it's one of those things like if you're going to do 3 or 4 takes, why not just switch it up on the last one and say, "Hey, I have nothing to lose. Let's just switch this up and see if it helps."
Absolutely, and especially the speed that film sets work now. You can reset in 10 seconds and get
Yes.
another. You may as well. So.
Absolutely. Well, so Christopher, are you someone who advocates a lot of storyboarding and a lot of pre-visioning? I know that there's many directors, myself included, who want every last shot planned out. Even if you get to set and then it's like, oh, actually, we're going to go a different direction, that
Mm.
at least there's a plan there so that you're not turning up on set and then trying to figure out what one is wanting to convey in terms of the semiotics and the visual messaging. But then I know other directors that really are very spur of the moment and maybe they just like to get some coverage and then try and figure out creatively if they want to do throw anything else into the mix. From all of this analytical work you've done, and particularly the very in-depth study that you've done of geniuses like Scorsese and Tarantino, which do you fall more like into that whole like plan mode, or do you just think it's kind of like you have to go with your gut?
I think it has to be both. The best results I've seen from myself and from people I've worked with come when you plan ahead so that you visualize the best possible scene that you can, and probably with the most equipment. Because when you're sitting at your desk and drawing a storyboard, you can go, okay, we'll dolly in here, crane up there, move around. When you get to set, you might not have time to do all that.
Yeah.
But if you've got that baseline, if you've gone, this is my perfect version that I want, then when you get to set, you're much less likely to compromise. If
Mm.
you don't plan ahead like that, you turn up to set and you go, oh, what ideas have I got? I've had 2 hours sleep,
Yeah,
maybe three.
precisely.
I'm not feeling very creative. We'll just cover it.
Yeah,
And
it's
all
horrible.
directors do this. It's, yeah.
Yeah,
So
it leads to bad things.
I
Yeah, I kind of feel like if one does that very heavy intentional work of preparing, I think it does two things. I think number one, it allows you to really, when you're in the quiet of your office and it's, weeks before production and you actually have the time to think about it, I think it enables one to just really crystallize in one's mind what the movie is about and what each scene is about, which I think is really important, even in terms of being able to speak to actors about it. But furthermore, I think what it does is just free you up to where you can then have those spur of the moment thoughts because you've done the heavy lifting in terms of figuring out what the scene needs to be. So then you have like the mental availability on set to be able to have creative, whimsical thoughts. So yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I'm more and more a fan of pre-visioning as well. I think that there's some incredible apps that are coming out, and I feel like even with working with actors, it's so helpful, or with your DP to just be able to show a fully fleshed out scene and then even be able to brainstorm with them because they've watched the whole thing from beginning to end and kind of tell you how you can make it better. I think that's a really fun part of the collaborative process.
Oh, absolutely. And not least, time is so limited on set that even if you're really, really good, you don't have time to have more than two or three ideas.
Yeah.
Whereas you've got, months before the film shoots, you can take any particular moment and spend hours on it. So you've had 20 good ideas by the time you get to
Yeah.
set.
Yeah,
Even
and
if
and
you go to
ideas and ideas that you've been able to research where it's like, well, how did that shot play out in another movie, which I think speaks to why your books are so valuable because if as a director you have an idea in your mind for a particular shot, you can go back to those master shot books and find the example of that particular shot and then kind of reverse engineer it and figure out why it's working and why it might work for your scene.
Absolutely. And I think being able to adapt spontaneously on set is vital, but you're much more likely to be good at that if you have all this grammar of film in your head solidly. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I know people take the books to set with them, and that's fine.
Oh, I would. I would. It's, if there's one thing you want in your bag, I mean, that's it. Because I think if you do get then caught in that stressful moment where it's like, guys, we don't have time to do 5 shots, we have to do one. How is this going to work? To have
Mhm.
something like that you can flip through with your DP and just be like, okay, like 10 minutes to brainstorm. Having a book like that is, I mean, it's a lifesaver.
Yeah, I've done it myself. I've taken the Master Shots books with me, and when I get stuck, I look through them and get an idea. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you've done all the heavy lifting, if anyone deserves to use that resource, it's yourself. Well, Christopher, we're about to enter our final act in which we're going to be getting some of your top recommendations. But before we do so, let's take a moment to thank our sponsors. When you're putting together that masterpiece movie, the coloring is a major creative decision. It can make the difference between whether the audience interprets your story as warm, cold, dark, or light, and it can help define the genre of the film. Here's a quick tip. Horror movies tend to have blue tones, romantic comedies tend to have warm tones, apocalyptic movies tend to be grey and washed out, movies in which reality is off kilter tend to have green tones, and action movies tend to feature a lot of teal and orange, particularly in their artwork. The Emmy Award winning Da Vinci Resolve from Blackmagic will help you get that perfect color for your next production. The Da Vinci Resolve 12 combines professional non-linear video editing with the world's most advanced color corrector, so you can now edit, color correct, finish, and deliver all from one system. The DaVinci Resolve is completely scalable and resolution independent, so it can be used on set, in a small studio, or integrated into the largest Hollywood production pipeline. From creative editing and multi-camera television production to high-end finishing and color correction, only DaVinci Resolve features the creative tools, compatibility, speed, and legendary image quality that you need to manage your entire workflow, which is why it is the #1 solution used on Hollywood feature films. Christopher, welcome to the final act where you'll be sharing incredible resources and mind blowing answers. Are you ready?
yes, I am.
Christopher, what is the best advice you've ever received?
I think the best advice would be to do with the politics of the set and uh, how to work with the people on set. So the way this was put to me was get to know the hair and makeup people.
Oh,
Uh,
yes. Because if you get on their bad side, it is not fun. I've learnt that.
it sounded like a joke at first, but this was
No.
a director who worked here and in Perth, and he was doing a lot of film and TV. And he said to me, "Don't worry about your shots and things until you've got this sorted,
Oh my
because when you
gosh.
start a shoot, everybody's watching you to see when you crack, make a mistake. Everybody's ready to become disloyal, and so
Mm.
you need to get a crew working for you. You can work with a crew that all hate you, but the more they support you and work with you, the better. So if
You
you
know
make
what?
friends,
That is so wise. I've had situations where it's like when it's like one bad apple rots the whole lot, and for whatever reason, and I'm not wanting to throw makeup and hair people under the bus because I am lucky to know some brilliant human beings in that line of work, and I have a great respect for that craft. But I think it's just a thing of because obviously people are sat around for so long getting their hair and makeup done, the natural thing to do is it's really easy to fall into gossip. And, I had one shoot, I think we fired like half of the team because we just got to a point where we literally were like, you know what, we cannot be having this. This is just pulling everyone down. And yeah, and eventually we actually really got to it's, as I said, it was a couple of people and we got that resolved and everything got back on track. But it really taught me a lesson like, wow, you want to hire those hair and makeup people, you want to hire people who are not just good at their job, but that have really good hearts and are really wise about how they use their tongue. And then you want to do everything you can to build a really good rapport with them because they're kind of like the waiting room of the entire set.
yeah, yeah, and I think it has to be genuine as well. You have to genuinely listen to their opinions, it's very difficult to find the time.
Yeah.
There's a hierarchy on set for a reason. There's a few people up by the camera, and everybody else spreads further away. And the further away they are, the more likely they can be to
To gossip.
disruptive.
Yes.
So you have to
Yes.
go up to them and put your arms around them and show them that you love them and care and that their work matters. And
Yes.
then when they are on set for final checks, one I remember there was one shot we were doing, and I was really stuck for ideas, and actually said, "Has anybody got an idea?" And the person who was doing, I think it was makeup that day, came up with an idea that actually solved the shot.
No
So,
way.
and then the loyalty was there for the next
Yeah.
few weeks.
That is honestly, I think that's probably one of the most original things I've heard. I don't know that anyone's ever shared that thought with me before, but now that you say it, it's like, wow, that's one of the most profound insights I've ever heard about on-set protocol. So I'm sure I'll be thinking of you in the future when next time I hopefully get to do things a little bit better in that area. Um, Christopher, I would love to know if you had just the one movie to stake your entire career on, what kind of movie would it be, and what talent would you want attached?
Oh, that's a funny question because, in a way, I already did that when I made the sculptor's ritual. That was me staking my entire career
Yeah.
on, and it didn't work out, and that was the end of my career.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
I mean, not I carried on working for no, what 6 or 7 years afterwards till I eventually decided to retire from directing.
Mm.
But the interesting thing about that is I'd still do it again. I'd say if you're going to stake your entire career on a movie, it should be something pretty low budget, something where you can get your teeth into interpreting a script. Because if you manage to get, say you were given the next Star Wars, you're part of a machine, and
Yes.
your talent is never going to show up underneath that machine. And that works even on a much smaller scale than Star Wars. You want to start with something that is probably personal and a passion piece for you, even if you're going to trip over yourself because of that.
Mm.
But yeah, and then you need to move on to interpreting other people's stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say if you're going to stake everything, it should be something that you care about enough that you're going to have the energy and the commitment to care every single time you say action, that you're there 100%, 18 hours a day, because it's at least 18 hours a day.
It is. It is.
And people sometimes, I know people who are already in the industry know this, and it's like sleep, whatever. But if you're getting into it, it can be really, really devastating to find out that for months you're having to live off 2 or 3 hours sleep. If
Yeah.
you've not had kids, that's a real shock to the system.
Oh my gosh. And I don't know how people do it who have kids. I'm like, I need someone to give me a like a primer course on that because I can't even imagine the logistics. It makes my head spin. So Christopher, I love to ask my guests to recommend a book that has been really instrumental in their career. Obviously, in your case, you have written not one, not two, but numerous really seminal works that I know just thousands of filmmakers refer to on a regular basis. Um, so I'm thinking I'd love to include in our show notes the link to at least one of those. And so I'm kind of wondering if someone was just maybe had never read any of your filmmaking books and was really just looking to get started, maybe they're fairly nascent in their career as a film director or as a writer even. Which of all of your books would you recommend that they get started with and why?
I'd recommend Mastershots Volume 3, probably because by the time I'd done the third one, I was a lot better at it.
Mm,
So the first volume remains the most popular because it's just a quick look at the basic shots and how they work. The third book was what I loved about doing it was that although it's the more advanced book in inverted commas, it gets to that advanced level by using the most basic techniques.
mm.
So it does work for beginners as well. If you've never analyzed a shot, never thought about what lens to choose or how to move a camera or how to frame something, it's all in that book. So that's my absolute favorite.
Fantastic. So start with number three and then work backwards. And yeah, brilliant. Well, we will definitely include the link for that. And presumably, I'm think I'm right in saying all of your books are now up on Amazon, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so
Yeah,
like if someone just loves that Master Shots 3, or if someone's a huge fan of Tarantino and is just thinking I need to learn to shoot like Tarantino, they can just go to Amazon, type in Christopher Kenworthy, and they're going to get all of those books
yeah,
coming up.
they're all on them. The only ones that aren't are the ebooks, the interactive ones we talked about earlier, which are only available on iBooks. So if you've got a Mac, a laptop, a desktop, or an iPad, that's what you need for those.
Yeah, I believe I think I got a hold of mine through iTunes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean anyone with iTunes, which is pretty much everyone these days,
Yes.
should be able to get a hold of that. And I really do recommend them because I think having those interactive videos that one can watch that demonstrates it, that demonstrates each of those shots is a real boon. So, Christopher, if you could recommend a movie for listeners, maybe something that you feel has taught you a lot about the semiotics of filmmaking, what would it be and why?
A film that I just keep watching, even now, years and later, is Juno, which
Yes.
it was a small film. It doesn't have massive camera moves or massive action. It's just people talking. It's not a show-off piece, if you will,
Mm.
but it's a really good example of combined talent. So you had a
Yes.
really great script, a young female actor who wasn't that well known at the time, hadn't peaked, but bristling with potential, and a director who loved his story.
Mm.
And so every single shot in that for me works. Absolutely everything. It's an
Yeah.
almost flawless film, beautifully done. And you watch that one, you go, why does something like this work? It's low budget, but they got it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
it's a
it's
massive.
just it's wonderfully touching and I think really really life affirming, which when we live in a world where there's just so much bad news and there's just so many movies that are really draining to one's soul, I think it's a rare delight to be able to watch a movie like Juno that's just really uplifting and gives some hope, and does so without pat answers. I mean, it's a movie that deals with a difficult subject, I think, with a lot of sophistication. So, Christopher, if you could recommend a website or an app for our listeners, something that you have really found to be of help to you as a filmmaker, what would it be and why?
Okay, it's the website of my publisher, which sounds like I'm just plugging my
It is an
publisher.
amazing website, though. I have to say, it
Yeah.
is genuinely an amazing website.
Yeah, so it's mwp.com, which is Michael Weesey Publishing. And the reason I recommend it is not because they've got my books, but because that's how I started. It was buying all their books that gave me my film school at home, if you will. I couldn't have even made my awful first 45-minute film if I hadn't had those books to give me the starting point. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I
it's just fantastic.
I would really say if someone's looking at putting some money into tuition, be it on a short course or a college type course, I would say honestly, just go take the summer off, take 2 or 3 months, spend the money that you would have spent on tuition on going and buying a whole bunch of books from Michael Weesey books, and just you are going to learn from some of the top teachers in the world through that resource, which is now over. Maybe Christopher, do you know the figure? Is it? I know it's over 200 books they have in their library, right?
Oh, I wasn't sure. Is that how many? Isn't it?
Oh,
I know.
it's a huge amount. And the wonderful thing is that there's really, um, cat, there's a book to be found in every category. I mean, we had on the show Richard Lamott. He wrote a wonderful book on costume, on the kind of costume design side of the industry, and then there's brilliant books on everything from finance to screenwriting to directing. It's really absolute treasure trove of resources. So we'll definitely make sure that we put that link in the show notes for anyone who wants to get hold of some fantastic filmmaking resource. Well, Christopher, it's time for the martini shot. What parting piece of guidance do you want to share with us?
I think you've always got to keep your eye on the story because film, it's about people, and it's really easy to forget that usually one person, in fact.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget it and focus on the plot, the machines, the monster, the ideas, all the stuff that gets you excited about the film, but really it is about how one person changes over the course of
Yes,
a couple of
yes.
hours.
I feel like
So
screaming yes to that because this is what I often find myself telling young writers. It's not about like the dinosaurs or the gadgets or the suit. It's about one person and, what is their worst fear? What is their biggest hope? And what is the challenge that they have to overcome?
absolutely. And you want to feel that all the way through. If you get that, you don't have to worry about all the mechanics of story too much, so long as you're aware of the story and caring about the person, the people, where they're going. If you know that for every shot, every single moment, you'll make a good film.
Absolutely. I think we can't stress that highly enough. Well, that's a wrap. Film Talk Nation. In this industry, you're only as good as the people you know. And today you've been hanging out with Christopher Kenworthy and myself. If you want to go the extra mile, head over to filmtalkpodcast.com and type Christopher Kenworthy into the search bar. The show notes from today's show will appear along with everything we discussed, like Christopher's recommended book and movie. Christopher, we appreciate you sharing your priceless insight with us today. Film Talk Nation thanks you, and we'll see you on the red carpet.
Beautiful. Thanks very much.